If you've ever stepped into a massive corporate role, or really any large organization, you know the drill,
Oh, absolutely.
right? There's this expectation of structure. You get an orientation, you're handed an employee handbook, and there are these standard operating procedures that just keep the machinery humming.
Yeah, it's predictable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know who reports to who, you know how a project gets approved, and, for a fact that the legal department is going to review anything before it goes public.
Right, because the institutional muscle memory simply takes over. The system is designed to run itself. It's almost independent of who happens to be sitting in the manager's chair on any given day.
But then you look at the executive branch of the United States government during the early days of the Trump presidency, and suddenly that massive, historically rigid employee handbook is just thrown completely out the window. We are looking at a governing landscape that is practically unprecedented in modern American history. So, welcome to today's deep dive into the source material. Today, we are unpacking the inner workings of the early Trump administration, using this really extensive reporting from Pulitzer Prize-winning journalists Philip Rucker and Leonnig.
From their book, A Very Stable Genius.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And just to be clear up front, because, we are dealing with one of the most polarizing figures in modern history, our goal today is not to litigate the politics.
Right. We're not taking sides here.
Not at all. We are treating this book like an architectural blueprint. We're simply looking objectively at how this specific administration stress-tested the structural engineering of the U.S. government. Neither of us are endorsing the viewpoints in the book. We're just imparting the facts and ideas laid out in the text.
Because our mission here is to explore the defining friction of this era. We want to look at the actual mechanics of what happens when a norm-breaking executive, someone who prioritizes personal loyalty and gut instinct above all else, collides head-on with the really rigid post-Watergate institutions of the government.
Okay, let's unpack this. To really set the stage for how this collision happened, we have to go back to a defining moment before the presidency even began.
The 2016 convention.
Right, the convention speech. He stands on that stage, and he declares to the crowd, "I alone can fix it."
Yeah, a huge moment.
And that single phrase wasn't just campaign rhetoric. It essentially established the blueprint for his entire governing style. He wasn't summoning the country to work together in a traditional political sense.
No, he was presenting himself as the sole indispensable solution.
Exactly. It was a style fueled by the perpetuation of his own personal power and really a profound rejection of traditional expertise.
What's fascinating here is that the mechanism of that I alone mentality immediately filtered down into how he built his team. The reporting in the book portrays a really stark structural divide in the administration's staff right from day one.
Like two different camps.
Basically, yeah. You essentially had two distinct types of aides trying to operate the exact same machine. You had those who genuinely believed the president was single-handedly saving the world. And then you had the seasoned professionals, who were often referred to internally as the adults in the room, who felt the world desperately needed saving from the president's worst impulses.
Wow. And, to understand the sheer scale of the crises that define those early months, we can't just look at the policies. We have to look at the transition period.
Transition is key.
Because standard presidential transitions are usually these massive, highly bureaucratic undertakings, right? You have teams of lawyers combing through financial records, past statements, foreign contacts of potential cabinet members.
It takes months of grueling administrative work.
Right. But this handover was treated less like a government transition and more like a television casting call.
The scene at Trump Tower in those weeks following the election, one advisor actually described it as being like the Jabba the Hutt bar in Star Wars.
The Jabba the Hutt bar. That is quite the visual.
I mean, it was just a chaotic parade of politicians, business leaders, celebrities moving through those golden-framed revolving doors. They were essentially pitching themselves for the highest jobs in the land right in front of the media cameras.
And the criteria for getting hired completely bypassed that traditional legal vetting we just talked about.
Right.
It was heavily based on the look, like television presence.
Yeah, aesthetics over experience in a lot of ways.
Take Mike Pompeo. The book details how he secured the CIA director job, which is, one of the most sensitive intelligence positions on the planet, in a single interview.
A single interview.
Yeah. Steve Bannon prepped him beforehand and basically told him, don't wait for a question, just rip into it.
And he did. He performed well in the room, so he got the job.
Or look at James Mattis. The president hired him as defense secretary, partly because he loved Mattis's nickname, Mad Dog, which, by the way, Mattis actually despised.
Right, he hated that name.
But the president loved it, and he thought Mattis physically resembled the actor George C. Scott playing General Patton in the movies.
It was entirely about casting central, but intertwined with that casting mentality was a demand for absolute blind loyalty, which actively dismantled those standard vetting processes.
Which leads to massive liabilities.
Exactly. And the perfect encapsulation of this structural breakdown is Michael Flynn. The day after the election, Ivanka Trump essentially grants Flynn his choice of top national security jobs. She just praises his loyalty during the campaign and asks him, "What do you want to do?"
With zero review of his background.
None.
I mean, there was no deep dive into his highly controversial tenure at the Defense Intelligence Agency. There was no review of his recent highly lucrative lobbying work for the government of Turkey.
And perhaps most astonishingly, this all happened even after outgoing President Obama had explicitly warned the incoming president, face to face, not to hire Flynn.
Wait, Obama gave a direct warning.
Yes, face to face.
Yeah.
But anyone who tried to apply the standard political guardrails was immediately punished. Chris Christie, who was originally running the transition, explicitly warned the president-elect that hiring Flynn would cause a massive liability.
He tried to tell him.
Yeah, Christie told him, "Take my word for it," trying to leverage his own political experience. And a few days later, Christie was completely ousted from his role as transition chair.
Wow. It really makes me think of a Silicon Valley startup. You see those aggressive tech companies that hire purely for culture fit and sheer unquestioning loyalty rather than looking at actual resumes or past performance.
Move fast and break things.
Exactly. They want disruptors who will break things.
Yeah.
But in this case, they were executing that startup strategy for the highest stakes imaginable. I mean, they're running the nuclear arsenal and the United States government.
And by valuing the personal brand and immediate fealty above all else, the incoming administration effectively stripped away the institutional guardrails. Normally, those guardrails, the vetting, the protocol, the rigorous policy review, they exist for a very specific reason.
To protect a new president from self-inflicted wounds.
Exactly. When you remove them, you are flying a massive aircraft entirely blind.
So you have this team hired for their TV presence and personal loyalty rather than, actual policy expertise.
Yeah.
But television presence doesn't write legislation.
No, it doesn't.
When that casting call cabinet actually had to execute complex legal documents, the lack of institutional knowledge caused an immediate systemic crash.
Because the administration actively bypassed the experts, their major initiatives hit reality like a brick wall. The rollout of the travel ban is the prime example of this mechanical failure.
Oh, man.
It was drafted in secret by Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller. They deliberately didn't consult the White House counsel's office.
They didn't consult their own lawyers.
Nope. They didn't consult the Justice Department to see if it would hold up in court either.
Which mechanically means the people who actually enforce the law have no idea what is happening.
Right.
John Kelly, who was the Secretary of Homeland Security at the time, the guy physically in charge of Customs and Border Protection. The book notes, he didn't see the final version until it was signed.
He was literally on an airplane when the ban went into effect.
Right. So when travelers started landing, the customs agents at the airports had no legal framework to process them. The CBP software hadn't even been updated to reflect the new executive order because the lawyers were never looped in.
It was total chaos.
It wasn't just a political controversy. It was a total operational failure. You had green card holders being detained simply because the system didn't know how to read the new rules.
And that disconnect between the top-level impulsive decisions and the cabinet members trying to manage the real-world fallout, that was a constant, grueling theme.
It wasn't an isolated incident.
Not at all. Take the diplomatic situation with Mexico. Rex Tillerson and John Kelly traveled to Mexico City to smooth over relations after the president had repeatedly threatened tariffs.
Standard diplomacy.
Right. They are down there meeting with their Mexican counterparts, working through standard diplomatic channels, thinking they are making solid progress.
And while they are doing that, the president is back in Washington, and he announces on live television that he is launching a military operation for mass deportations.
Tillerson and Kelly are completely blindsided. Kelly is literally standing in a hotel hallway in Mexico City, cursing in sheer frustration.
I mean, can you imagine?
He then has to go out and explicitly correct his own boss on camera, assuring the international press that the U.S. military will absolutely not be used for deportations.
And this impulsivity infected the daily operations of the White House just as much as foreign policy. Look at Mike Dub. He comes into the Oval Office to interview for the communications director job.
Just an interview.
Yeah. 20 minutes into the interview, the president impulsively decides he wants to hold a press conference. Right then,
Out of nowhere.
Doug is just standing there with his visitor badge still on. And suddenly, he is watching the President of the United States call a live, rambling 77-minute press conference because he just wanted to put on a show and complain about the media coverage.
It's wild.
But, let me play devil's advocate for you for a second. If you listen to the campaign rhetoric, wasn't this exact chaos what his voters wanted?
That's a fair question.
Because Stephen Miller is quoted in the book specifically saying their mandate from the voters was to break China. They believed that following normal bureaucratic procedures just played into the hands of their political enemies. So, structurally speaking, isn't this exactly what was advertised on the tin?
Well, the book addresses this disruptor mentality by referencing the philosopher Edmund Burke.
Okay, what did Burke say?
He wrote that rage and frenzy will pull down more in half an hour than prudence, deliberation, and foresight can build up in 100 years. Yeah, breaking the China is the easy part. Disruption is incredibly simple when you hold executive power. But governing a global superpower requires building functional policy frameworks that actually survive court challenges and international scrutiny. The administration's ad hoc, television-focused style actively prevented them from building anything structurally sound.
It makes a lot of sense. And as that operational chaos generated intense negative media scrutiny, and especially as the investigation into Russian election interference started really heating up, the president began to feel cornered.
Understandably, from his perspective.
Right. And instead of relying on the standard legal processes of the presidency, he demanded absolute personal protection from his staff. This is where the friction really sparks, because that demand fundamentally broke the norms of modern governance.
The authors illustrate the president's deep disconnect from these institutional norms with a really vivid anecdote about an HBO documentary.
Oh, this part was wild.
Yeah. A film crew came to the White House to record him reading the Constitution, specifically Article 2, which is the section that outlines the powers of the executive branch.
Which is fitting. But he struggles with the archaic 18th century language of the text.
Right, which happens.
But instead of laughing it off or just asking for a second take, he gets incredibly angry. He blames the camera crew for rustling paper. And what is most telling about this scene is that there was no protocol in place to manage the situation.
None. The documentary director literally had to reach into her own purse to give the President of the United States a bottle of Aquafina because there was no White House staff managing the room.
It's just a bottle of water, but it symbolizes how completely detached the environment was from standard presidential decorum and support structures.
And that detachment became a massive structural liability when it came to his relationship with the Justice Department. Attorney General Jeff Sessions recused himself from the Russia probe.
And mechanically, why did he do this?
Because standard DOJ ethics rules clearly dictated he had to. Given his prominent role in the campaign and his undisclosed meetings with the Russian ambassador, it was a textbook conflict of interest. Recusal was standard operating procedure for any lawyer in that position.
But the president didn't see it as standard legal procedure. He saw it as a deeply personal betrayal. He finds out about the recusal while flying on Air Force One, and his reaction is explosive.
Explosive is an understatement.
He is screaming so loud that junior staffers literally had to put on their headphones just to drown out the sheer rage.
Yeah, they were trapped on the plane.
He later screams at White House counsel Don McGahn, furious that McGahn didn't somehow intervene to stop the recusal. And he yells, this is the direct quote, "Where's my Roy Cohn?
Yeah.
Where's my Bobby Kennedy? Where's my J. Edgar Hoover?"
That quote is so revealing.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because I need to stop you there and look at this historically. I think a lot of people might wonder the exact same thing the president did.
How so?
Well, the president appoints the attorney general, right? They are part of the executive branch.
Yeah.
And Trump is actually right that past presidents had fierce loyalists in the Justice Department. JFK literally appointed his own brother, Bobby Kennedy, to run it.
True.
Obama had Eric Holder, who famously referred to himself in public as the president's wingman. So, mechanically, what is stopping a president from treating the AG like his personal lawyer? Why was this expectation of a protector suddenly considered so completely out of bounds by his staff?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, It all comes down to the mechanics of the post-Watergate landscape.
Okay, the Nixon era.
Exactly. Steve Bannon actually had to sit the president down and explain this historical shift. Bannon told him that the era of J. Edgar Hoover secretly bringing confidential files over to the Oval Office ended with Richard Nixon.
The rules changed.
Right. After the abuses of Watergate, the institutional norms shifted drastically. The government rebuilt the rules to intentionally insulate the Justice Department from the president's personal political needs. The president fundamentally misunderstood the structural role of the Attorney General. He viewed the AG as his personal defense lawyer, his own Roy Cohn, rather than the nation's chief law enforcement officer who answers to the Constitution.
And when those appointed officials like Sessions and Don McGahn refused to violate those post-Watergate norms to act as his personal fixers, the president decided to take matters into his own hands.
He wanted to force the issue.
He wanted to unilaterally eliminate the cloud of the Russia probe, and that impulse triggered a catastrophic institutional backlash.
He decides to fire FBI Director James Comey, and the execution of this firing is almost Shakespearean in its bureaucratic bungling.
It is staggering. They know they need a pretext, so they use a memo written by the brand-new Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein. This memo criticized Comey's handling of the Hillary Clinton email investigation from the previous year. It was essentially a CYA memo, a cover-your-ass document designed to provide bureaucratic justification for an action.
A paper trail.
Exactly. The White House uses this CYA memo to justify the firing. Then, they send the president's former personal bodyguard, Keith Schiller, to hand-deliver the termination letter to FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C.
Which sounds straightforward enough, except
Comey wasn't even in the building. He was 2,900 miles away in Los Angeles, giving a speech to FBI recruits.
they didn't even check his schedule.
No, the administration didn't even check the public schedule of the FBI director before firing him.
And the political and structural fallout was instantaneous. Chris Christie calls the president and bluntly tells him he has created a shitstorm.
His exact words.
Yeah. The White House immediately tries to get Rod Rosenstein to go on television to take the blame, to tell the public that the firing was entirely his idea based on his memo.
And Rosenstein isn't having it.
Rosenstein flatly refuses to lie for them.
So instead of laying low and managing the crisis, what does the president do? He invites top Russian officials into the Oval Office the very next day.
You can't make it up.
And he brags to them. He tells them that firing the nut job, Comey had relieved the great pressure he was facing from the investigation.
Meanwhile, Rod Rosenstein is furious. He feels completely used by the White House for political cover, and he is horrified when he finds out that James Comey actually leaked his own private memos to the press to force the Justice Department's hand.
So all the dominoes are falling.
Exactly. So because Sessions is recused, Rosenstein is acting as the Attorney General for this specific case. And he uses his power to appoint a special counsel. He appoints Robert Mueller.
Firing Comey to stop the investigation is like, it's like someone getting annoyed by a beeping smoke detector, so they smash it with a hammer, completely unaware that breaking the detector automatically triggers the building's massive, unturn-off-pull emergency sprinkler system.
That is a perfect analogy.
By trying to squash the problem, he ignited an inferno.
And that is the ultimate structural irony of these events. The president's entire operating philosophy throughout his life in real estate and television was based on overpowering individuals.
Right, one-on-one dominance.
Exactly. He relied on leverage, intimidation, personal dominance. But by firing the FBI director in such a clumsy, transparent way, he activated the faceless, unbendable institutional immune system of the United States Justice Department.
And Robert Mueller was the literal embodiment of that immune system.
Mueller was the ultimate straight-arrow G-man. He was a man who, during his time as FBI director, literally instructed his staff to cross out the word I in his speeches.
Really?
Yeah, he wanted to emphasize the collective work of the Bureau over any single individual. He was the exact diametric antithesis of the solipsistic I alone can fix it worldview.
Ah.
The president tried to overpower an individual, and instead he summoned a relentless institution.
And the president's reaction to hearing the news about Mueller's appointment is incredibly revealing. He slumps in his chair in the Oval Office and declares, "I'm fucked. This is the end of my presidency."
Just total defeat in that moment.
And then he turns his rage entirely on Jeff Sessions, emotionally breaking his attorney general until Sessions submits a formal resignation letter. But the president doesn't even accept the resignation.
No, he just keeps the letter in his pocket like a shock collar. It's a piece of ultimate leverage to ensure compliance.
The chilling effect this entire sequence had on the machinery of government was profound. The book highlights George Conway, a highly respected conservative lawyer who was slated for a top civil division job at the DOJ. And his wife, Kellyanne Conway, was a top White House advisor.
Right, very connected to the administration.
Very connected. He is literally sitting at his daughter's elementary school flute recital, reading on his iPad about the administration's shifting, contradictory stories regarding Comey's firing.
Just watching it unfold in real time.
Yeah. And right there in the auditorium, he decides to completely back out of the job. He realizes the administration is essentially at war with his own Justice Department, and he wants no part of that structural collapse.
Because why would you?
Exactly. So what does this all mean for you, the listener? When we look back at the source material, the very stable genius, we see that the dizzying headlines of the early administration weren't just random acts of madness.
They had a root cause.
They were the highly predictable symptoms of a leader trying to run a massive, complex constitutional republic using the exact same instincts he used as a reality TV boss and a private real estate developer. It is a masterclass in what happens when the culture of an executive radically misaligns with the operational structure of the organization they are leading. You simply cannot run a government of laws like a chaotic casting call.
And this raises a massive structural question, and it's one I want to leave you with today. The American system of government relies heavily on laws, yes, but it relies just as much on unwritten rules, gentlemen's agreements, and traditional norms of behavior to keep the gears turning smoothly. But what happens when a leader comes along who realizes that a norm isn't actually a law? What happens when they realize that if you simply choose to ignore the unwritten rules, the system doesn't immediately know how to stop you because it assumes everyone will just play along?
That's the real stress test.
In that kind of collision, does the institution eventually break under the pressure, or does it permanently rewrite its own DNA in order to survive?
Do we need a new operating manual, or do we just need to bolt the machinery down tighter? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. Keep questioning the narratives, keep looking at the structures beneath the headlines, and we will catch you next time.